So folks who have joined the meeting already, we're just going to give it a few more minutes to let participants join. And I'll also need some time to promote folks who are here from the applicant team on today's first item. So if you're in the audience already, please just bear with me while we get some of these startup items in the virtual world of meetings happening in the background. So thank you. So Tom and Rebecca, I did just attempt to promote Dan and Renee, and they declined. Are they just here to listen, or will they be participating?
I think they're just here to listen, so that's perfect.
Okay. Great. So I think I've got the key folks up then. And with that, I will welcome everyone to the wow, it's already November 2nd meeting of the Development Review Committee. I am Rebecca Shapiro, Deputy Zoning Administrator, and I chair this group. I'm joined on the DRC by our two consulting architects, Linda Pansini and Russ Sherman. And we have two items today, so we'll attempt to be efficient with our time. First up is 500 Ellis Street, which is a planned hotel and office building project in the East Wisman neighborhood. Just as a sort of a matter of order for folks who are unfamiliar with or have forgotten our sort of standard procedures for the meeting. We, for each item, will typically welcome a brief applicant presentation, followed by an opportunity for any members of the public who are in the audience today to share thoughts and questions with the DRC and the applicant team. And then we'll bring it back to the DRC and applicant to have a discussion about site and building architecture for the projects that are agendized, and we'll follow that procedure for each item today. One final reminder is for folks who are participating via the Zoom app or web interface, you can use the raised hand button when I call for public comment to raise your hand, and I'll pull people up one by one to comment. If you're participating by phone, you'll use *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute yourself when I call on the last couple digits of your number. So with that, I will turn to the applicant team for 500 Ellis to lead off with your presentation, and you should be able to share your screens.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much for the introduction and getting everything settled and squared up. I appreciate it. My name is Tom Jess. I'm with Eris Studio Architects, and I'm representing the applicant for the project here. Appreciate the time, and everyone can see my screen okay? Perfect. Okay, so I thought what we'd do is just kind of briefly run through this, and I'm hoping that we can have plenty of time for question and answers, and we can kind of answer any questions you may have, and look forward to hearing your feedback. So the project site currently is 2 single-story office buildings with surface parking. Here's a couple images of what's there, and here's a site plan. So National being the street on the left, Ellis running across the bottom here. There's 2 buildings here. They're going to be removed. along with the surface parking. However, we are doing our best to preserve as many of the trees as possible. So we are preserving trees around the perimeter, and there's one tree in the center of the site that we're able to preserve. And the landscape architect is on the call as well if there's specific questions, but I'll kind of touch on that a little bit. The proposed site plan is for a 6-story hotel here on the corner of Ellis and National, and then a 2-story office building a little further down Ellis, with a the hotel lobby entrance is on the corner. The guest pickup and drop off from the vehicles is in the back here. The vehicle circulation comes off of National and circulates here. This is where most of the circulation is going to go. However, there is a secondary access and an exit only out onto Ellis. One of the things that we looked at with this, and we went back and forth with staff and different layouts, configurations a number of times, had to do with the parking and how to address the parking. So the parking is shielded and sheltered, so it's hidden in the back. So you come off the back, and we're utilizing a mechanical parking system, which I'll kind of show you a couple images of. But the parking is central to the building, and that allowed us to line the building around the sides with active uses and different things that other than parking. So the automated parking system is located in the center of the project. We do have some surface parking in the back of the proposed office for accessible parking, also for oversized vehicles or things that don't really work very well in the mechanical parking. And the mechanical parking is a fully automated system. It's a little bit different than puzzle lifts or storage lifts that we use on other projects. This one, they slide onto a tray and then are slid into their space. They come back out. And if there's specific questions on that, we're happy to answer that. But it would be a valet system. The bike parking is also another component. So we have short-term bike parking along Ellis and then long-term bike parking along this secondary driveway here. And the reason we located it over here was to keep it out of the Paseo, so that the Paseo is more of a pedestrian area and not a bike area. But we worked hard to make sure that we have an active street front along Ellis, including an outdoor patio that's semi-recessed into the building to kind of activate this area along here. There's a landscaped Paseo, which as part of the precise plan, there's a circulation path that runs through here up to where National curls around. But we've really enhanced this and went above and beyond what's in the precise plan to really make this an active and inviting place. And I'll kind of show you some images of that. As I mentioned, it's a pedestrian connection. And then the office lobby entrance is off of that Paseo. Upstairs, there's office space upstairs, and on the hotel building, the guest rooms wrap the parking as we discussed. So they wrap around the perimeter. The parking's located in the center. And so this is some of the items that we wanted to kind of get your feedback on and get your thoughts on. Just the general configuration, the massing, the hierarchy, how we laid things out. A lot of it was driven by the design guidelines and the influences from the precise plan. So when we look at massing, we kind of, this is for the hotel building, obviously. The prominent key corner here, it plays a big role. It's the tallest part. It has unique materials, a different lobby entrance that kind of sets itself off. And then we overlap that with the lower massing, which is broken up into 3 separate massing because of its length. And then we downplay the massing up above, which is kind of a little bit of a recessed element there. And that kind of wraps around. Here's another diagram of the National elevation. You can see it kind of carries around, and it's very similar in that regard, but obviously a little bit different. So here's the corner of National and Ellis with the prominent key corner element here. And you can see that's driven by the design guidelines. And that was something that we worked with staff quite a bit, was to make this prominent corner here. So we do have different materials here on the corner, and I'll kind of go into the materials a little bit later, but it's a metallic finish Trespa panel here on there. We're emphasizing the vertical here with the windows in slots. We have a frame around it that's going to have some accent lighting and wood siding, as opposed to other, that's kind of highlighting this element here that frames that element. Large 2-story lobby entrance here that's really prominent there on the corner. Lots of glazing carrying itself up, and then you also get an idea of this, the lower massing carrying itself across here. The window pattern is dictated by the guest room. So whenever there's a hotel, there's a regular window pattern. But what we're trying to do is distinguish that and break it up into smaller chunks rather than one big overwhelming mass. Here's that elevation as you turn the corner. You can see here as it comes around National, where it's similar massing, but just condensed a little bit different size to that. And then here's the view looking back at the building from Ellis. You can see that the step back areas on the ground floor is really important. So what we did was had lots of transparency with large windows, and then recessed the courtyard into here and punched a little railing out a little further out into the space, into the setback area here, and try to keep this as active and inviting as possible. And then we recessed the upper 2 stories back to kind of create a break in the building and have the lower 4 stories clearly distinguishable from the upper 2 stories. This is the back of the building, facing the adjacent buildings. So we have the way that the parking sits in the center. The parking is recessed back, which you can see over here on the side. We have windows and active building frontages on the sides where the parking is centered in the middle. We're proposing to do a mural on the face of the parking. It's a good opportunity to do that because it is a blank face. It's just the parking lifts behind that, and the design of which is to be determined. We're not proposing any specific artwork at this time. So here's a look at the hotel building and some of the materials. As I mentioned, we have the Trespa panels here on the corner element with the accent lighting and the frame. We have some EFS, and we kind of keep the colors more neutral with highlighting here at the corner with the darkest color, kind of drawing your attention there. And here's a couple axonometrics, just kind of diagramming the different reliefs in there. So you can see the tower has the frame going around it. The other massing that juxtaposes and contrasts with it. The big awning over the lobby, and then the tall glazing on the ground floor. We do have a very tall ground floor. I think it's almost 20 feet, 19'5" floor to floor. So we have a tall first story there. So we get that extra height on the ground floor. Here's that same tower as you wrap around. Similar massing. We do have a separate little cafe entrance here. So you can enter right directly into the cafe, which is accentuated with an awning and the large windows on the ground floor. And then you can see the recess there on the top floor for the subservient massing that kind of sits back. This is wrapping around looking at the Paseo elevation, where we've recessed the building back and created these private patios that look out onto the Paseo. And that's kind of to activate the Paseo, have multiple levels looking down into it, making sure that that space is an active, inviting space. And then having an awning over the spill out area for the meeting room. We'll kind of touch on this a little bit. And then for the office building, because the office building is 2 stories as opposed to the 6-story hotel, we wanted it to have its own presence. We didn't want it to get completely dominated by the hotel. So what we tried to do was really simplify the massing and make fewer, stronger statements with the office building, so it had its own presence as opposed to breaking it up into smaller elements. You can kind of see this with a little massing diagram there. And so the office building, we kept the lobby and entrance as articulated and very clearly identifiable off the Paseo, but the facing the street, we did the frame, but took it all the way around 4 sides and cantilevered it out so that it's kind of a stronger statement. And then on the ground floor, plenty of large windows looking into the office space. We did raise them up to provide a little privacy for the office dwellers, but still lots of windows. And then you can see that element that we discussed there. The colors are similar in terms of muted colors, downplaying a little bit, trying to keep it a little bit classic. And then we do have the wood siding around inside the frame. So they do tie together, but the simpler, stronger elements we're hoping allow the office building to not get lost. Here's a couple diagrams showing the relief. This is the lobby entrance here, how it wraps the corner, and you can see the frame coming around and coming down. And then on the second floor, there is a recessed patio, and we have some the wood siding back in there on that with the glass railing there. This is in the back where the office projects out over the tuck under parking. And then this is on the side where we do have the bike storage, and tried to make it very an inviting area, so you don't feel like you're just in the back of the building parking your bike, but try to make it an inviting retail storefront type appearance for where you would be parking your bikes. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about the open space. And this is the open space primarily on this building. It's the Paseo, which links through to the adjacent properties that are going to be developed. And there's some plans already approved for one of those two. And so what we're doing is we're tying into that. And you can see we're bringing the landscape down the center. And what we're doing is trying to divide this into a couple different sides. One is the public area here, which is the pedestrian connection through here. You can see through here, this is the pedestrian connection. And then we have a semi-private area over here. That's the spill out area for the meeting rooms, the hotel, kind of a little bit quieter lounge areas over here. This also acts as the circulation from the parking to the office lobby. So we wanted to make sure that that was an attractive path to be circulating through. This is highlighting those semi-private areas that we were just talking about. And then you can also see the second story spaces, whether it's on the hotel guest rooms or whether it's on the office. So there's second story office, second story balcony spaces looking down into the Paseo. This is a quick little landscape plan showing you that the gray striped ones are the existing trees that are remaining. The green ones are the new trees that are being planted. And then just wanted to touch real briefly on the lighting. Most of the lighting's low level bollards and so forth. There's a couple pole lights, but and then there's some bollards here to kind of restrict traffic flow through here. Very clean, simple, modern fixtures. And that's about it. And tried to keep it as brief to kind of get the introduction going, and then looking forward to hearing your feedback and getting your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Before any further discussion or questions, I'll just look at our attendee list here. Is anyone in the audience here today who would like to provide any public comment or feedback or questions for the DRC? Please raise your hand now. If so, okay. Seeing
Rebecca, you're muted.
yeah, at the DRC level, I think we are often eager to get to the building, but we will often start with site and frontage design comments. So with Russ and Linda's permission, I'll kick things off there. With I think probably a few initial bits of feedback for the design team to consider, but also kind of setting the stage, I think, for things that are both site and building design related. So yeah, I think it doesn't come as a shock to anyone participating that there's a real clear objective and imperative for more pedestrian engaging and oriented site and building design in East Wisman than exists today, as the area transforms into a more dense mixed use district overall. And so I think you'll hear building comments today that are really about how you orient the design and provide more detail towards public frontages of the project. But at a site level, I think I'll appreciate as a starting point the work that you've done thus far on tree preservation. It's something that frequently comes up at DRC. So the fact that you've put in a lot of that work already is appreciated. It saves me a few extra sentences. Layering on that, as you continue to work on your landscape designs, I'll mention a few key objectives that you may have heard from staff about already, but bear repeating if so. The first is that we have very, very strong objectives to try to maximize tree canopy in development and redevelopment projects. A great first step is preserving the healthy tree canopy that you already have. But as you're looking at your tree planting plan, our hopes is that you find opportunities to incorporate new larger canopy trees into the sort of the ecosystem of the project as you work on those plans. Additionally, and this is something that's come up more recently on projects, our city council has defined an objective for projects to aim for 75% California native plants across the sort of entirety of the palette and planting programs. So we'll want to see you incorporating that information into your plans and working towards that 75% target as well. There are a few, I think a lot of our sort of potential site plan comments today are really more about building interface. So I'm gonna, I think, forestall too many more site plan comments, but I do have two remaining things I want to bring up. The first is I actually appreciated the circulation run through you gave, about the transition of the on-site drive into a one-way corridor as you pull through the north side of the property. One of the things that actually highlighted for me though is a little bit of concern about how far back from the Ellis Street frontage the secure bike room is. I think kind of get behind wanting to delineate pedestrian from bicycle access points, but what I think we don't want to have happen is a bike room that's situated in a way that means that we'll have a lot of bicyclists like coming the wrong way down that drive aisle, or being forced sort of off their bikes into an overly narrow sidewalk in order to get to the bike parking areas. So I would do some reconsideration of where you're placing that bike room to try to prioritize sort of safe and convenient bike access to the secure parking areas, because I think it will be a well-used amenity in this area. The second thing that is catching my eye is, and this is a little bit of a compliance and design comment, is I appreciate the width that we have of the Paseo through the combination of the circulation corridor and the amenity space that you're providing on top of it. But I also want to make sure, given the depth that we have, that we're providing sort of opportunities for folks passing through to have a space to be there. And right now, both that frontage area at the Ellis sidewalk, and sort of the core design feels like it's a little bit heavily focused on sort of the circulation component, and at the frontage, I feel like there's I'm a little bit concerned that the sort of extent of planter and sort of stair and pathway is such that we're losing some of that welcoming feel that we'll want to kind of pull people in and make them feel like this is an area that they want to be in and can easily circulate through. Some of that might be the grading, to be honest. Meaning, you have to come up so high that it doesn't feel like it's an obvious area for people to move into and through. And so I think this Paseo condition, particularly at the access point at Ellis, needs some rethinking. Russ and Linda, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts, particularly on the Paseo, but
no, for me, I usually go into the architecture. Rebecca,
Yep. Yeah.
I guess the only comment I might have about the Paseo in follow up to Rebecca's comments, that sometimes with this sort of space, if as you approach it, if you're immediately hit by stairs or ramp, something like that, it tends to say, oh, I've got to climb up here and get up here to this other level. So maybe there's a way to push those elements back further so that as you come in, you have a significant, what I'll call landing area, but it goes back in quite a ways. So it feels more part of the sidewalk along Ellis than it feels like this private space that belongs to the buildings. If there's a way to look at where you make that break and where you change elevations, that's just one thought I had. And you might be able to bring, more planting at that front edge to soften it up. And then the transition spaces with steps and ramps would be further back in. But I would say maybe take a look at that.
Okay.
yeah,
Well,
and just
go ahead.
building on that, it could be that, I mean, there's so many different points of access and types of access
Mhm.
that, like, also thinking about how you could simplify that so that
Yeah.
it's a clear that this is where people come in, sort of this is a landscape zone, and then sort of it can be more episodic as you move further in. But
Yeah, one thought I had just while we're on the call here was since this entrance here is really the primary circulation entrance that the public would be using, is if we were to shuffle things around a little bit and kind of downplay this one over here, which is get you up into the semi-private space, maybe widen this area and shallow the stairs up so that it's a couple stairs, a little bit of a landing, a couple stairs, a little bit of a landing. So it's a little bit more gradual and less intimidating, like I think Linda was saying, is that when
Mhm.
you're looking at the stairs right there, but maybe we can just kind of soften those up so that this is clearly inviting and this side's a little bit downplayed so that there's a clear hierarchy that this is the one that the public's going to be using.
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I think that could be part of the
Yeah.
system, but
Good
but
point.
yeah, the objective is to be really much, rethink that entry point, and again, sort of thinking about how you're providing to make it feel just a little bit more open and welcoming, and then thinking about the balance and design of amenities that you incorporate along there to encourage it as a place not just to pass through, but to pause on your way to work, or to meet people for lunch or something like that.
Sure. And we did incorporate, some bench seating along the way and some little alcove areas,
Yeah.
but you're thinking for more than that?
Thinking more than that, and or sort of the nature of the design of those features to make them feel a little bit more special and eye-catching. But the biggest reaction and sort of area of focus is really that entry point.
Okay.
Which I think is a fine point at which to leap into the building architecture. Could you bring up, and I don't know if you have as a backup slide or in the deck already, I think there was a combined sheet in the plan set that showed both the office and hotel design strategy. Would that be a useful sheet to have up, Russ and Linda, as a starting point?
Mhm.
Let me see. Yeah, I just scrolling on the other screen right now while we're talking to pull it up. I'll
Great.
just do it on this screen so that you can see what I'm working on. Maybe this one.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think just maybe to kick off the conversation, and Russ and Linda are my architectural experts. But I think one of the things there were two kind of, I think, lines of thought that we had reactions to in looking at the proposed buildings. One was this question of, and you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, is sort of how much and what relationship should the two buildings have to each other as far as their design strategies. And then two is, how effectively are we finding that the specific design of each building is in implementing, these sort of bigger picture design strategies, design and massing strategies that you've highlighted in these documents. And it's great to have these as a kind of a cheat sheet to illustrate your intent. And Russ and Linda, I don't know, in those two big buckets, you want to start with the relationship between the buildings kind of questions and discussion, or?
Maybe Linda, maybe start if you want to start. Well, maybe I will start.
Go ahead.
So I appreciate, Tom, that the buildings don't necessarily need to have a common architectural language. And that was something that in the meeting prior to this, that we debated back and forth. Should they, shouldn't they, should they, shouldn't they? I was more on the should, they should, just so you know. But it's not my project, and I you don't know me from this committee, but I tend to try and do it, go with where the architect wants to go, and to just try and push in that direction. I'm just saying, I kind of appreciate where, that they're trying to be different. They have different modularities. Let's say one is, cellular kind of modularity versus a kind of big open floor plan of the office building. And I think the vocabulary that you've struck relative to the office building, at least, does touch upon that. I would, so I don't know, maybe I'll stop there, and maybe I'll let Linda kind of go. I'm not going to make a comment maybe until we get to the architecture of both. But so I appreciate these diagrams, to be honest. I think Rebecca said that I'm begging architects every 2 weeks to give us these diagrams. So they're very helpful, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that just in looking at the diagrams, for me, the strategy for the massing of the office building is much more clear than it is for the hotel, because it's simpler, it's a smaller scale. I think that there are proportion elements of the office building that are much more successful than the ones for the hotel. And that's just purely going from the diagrams. I do think that one thing that we did talk about a little bit with in the briefing meeting was with the hotel, in looking especially at the east elevation, that corner at Ellis and National does want to be emphasized, but then there's this, I'm going to call it the gray piece, that's the first 4 stories apparently. It seems to interrupt that. It pushes out more and becomes more prominent than the corner. And I think when we get into the architecture more, we can discuss how there might be ways to let that corner have more prominence than it does right now. And so I understand what the idea is behind these, these different forms and and elements, but I think
It's-
it somehow needs to be more exciting. It's
I guess-
particularly for the hotel.
I guess, Linda, I'm gonna pick up a little bit on
Sure,
this,
sure.
a little bit more. Is, because maybe I didn't give enough suggestion or whatever here. So here's the things I kind of notice about the buildings, and they're clearly different architecturally. So we can talk about that in a minute. But if I just think about where entry is, what my eye does, and the language being proposed, while the language of the architecture doesn't need to be the same, some of the ideas should carry through. So for instance, I do see where the golden tone is called prominent corner entry, okay? And in some regard, when you look at the perspectives, right, and I'm going to annotate here, right, this thing becomes the tallest piece, and we'll maybe get to the architecture in a little bit, and the eye tries to get to that point. That is not what happens on the office building. In the office building, the architecture, in my mind, this is the most prominent piece because it is coming forward. It is the framed element. It is the thing. So in my mind, I'm not asking for the architecture to be the same because I understand that that from your standpoint, they should be very different. But I don't think that from the massing, from the diagram, that the corner of the entry of the office building is in fact prominent. To me, in fact, it's actually separated from the rest of the building, both in architectural language and in massing, when you look at the perspectives in particular. So while I'm not asking the architecture to be the same, if you're telling me that this is the prominent thing, my eye should get there, right? And I don't think it does in the office building. I think the framed element is the prominent piece on this architecture. So I'm trying to be more clear in that I'm not asking to be the same because clearly the vocabulary is different, but I'm asking that if it is the prominent corner, that somehow they are handled in a way that makes them prominent.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, I'm not arguing with you. I think that makes a lot of sense. The thought process was that the hotel corner is actually at the corner of the site. So
Yep.
it's a key corner, and that one needed to be a lot more prominent, just because of its location in the context of the city streets as opposed to building to building. So the thought process was that we did distinguish this element with materials and colors and glazing and so forth, but I would not argue with you at all that this element here is the most prominent element on the office building. And the reason that we did that was just so that the office building, because the office building really is only a 2-story building and a much smaller footprint.
Yep.
In order to give it some visual weight, we tried to make a big, strong statement on that one so that it wouldn't get lost relative to the scale, just the scale of the hotel. But I mean, we could make that statement and still make the lobby entrance more prominent. We can certainly do that. So I think that's something we can consider, but that was the thought process behind it.
Yeah, and I think picking up on that point, I think there are a lot of different ways that you can take that. I think you can do it in a way that feels like it's comparable and similar to the hotel. You could also do it in a way that is, specifically reactive by sort of material and other means to the, prominent projecting form. The other thing that we really wanted to focus on, I appreciate you highlighting the larger windows into the office at the building base, but when we were looking at this diagram, we saw, that on the office building along Ellis, you're kind of creating this relationship between the northeast corner and the building base, something that carries through. But when I was looking at the elevation, there's actually seemed like two detached elements. I think they get like a different color and or material treatment. And so that was sort of point number one about the building base, we spend a lot of time talking about the base of buildings and in thinking about ways to make them engaging, interactive, and interesting to folks who are circulating by walking or bicycling. And so even though you have the large windows, there, I think we found that the building base felt a little bit too plain. And actually here, yeah, you're seeing, so like when I look at that elevation, I don't see the diagram at all. Because the color and material of the ground plane in the center is connected to the recessed plane of the volume, the projecting volume above, rather than that northeast corner.
So this element
And it's
coming
got
across
like a
here.
really, really plain materiality as well. So given the diagram and the strength of the massing, the second floor massing, in order to make that ground plane feel a little bit more special in connection with the comments we already made about the key corner, I would ask myself what's the sort of material and or landscape design that's going to create that sort of pedestrian interest and comfort in the ground plane to kind of like stand up a little bit more against this proud feature that you have above it. Like overall, I think for the office building, we'd like you to look at how you're creating material interest and contrast within the design to highlight the different areas that you have diagrammatically set up.
I mean, in this, so I don't know who just drew that, but was that you, Tom?
No, you
I
was,
mean,
yeah.
this is the diagram, but that's not what the architecture is doing. And so
Right.
I think if you bring it back to the diagram, you'll strengthen the corner entry at the paseo of the office building.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Okay. Did you want to go back to the diagrams, or you want me to go to the ground floor of the hotel, or?
Is it worth just before we move on to maybe to the hotel, are there other facades of the office building that are worth talking about? Like does the rear facade need some attention? And I think the thing that struck me as we were pulling the sides and the rear is that spaces seem to not as strongly follow kind of the diagram that you have set up. Things got kind of a little bit busier, and it was hard to just find a consistent theme. And then when we got to the rear, it's like that projecting form just has like an entirely different application. And I understand, I think you're probably doing that to try to minimize the tuck under parking, but it felt a little bit odd man out on the rear elevation.
That's our little Corbusier pilotis.
I was actually okay. I was actually okay with it on the rear. It's on the paseo part where I felt it got jumbled. The Villa Savoy, is that the reference, right? Is so I don't know if we go to if maybe we went to the plan. Yeah, it's more if we went to the plan of this, of the lobby.
Let me get there.
Yeah.
So again, when I first looked at this, I was like, wow, if the lobby could pull and that stair that's in there, right, which is an open stair,
correct, could
be more visible on that thing instead of there's the gray mass next. If you go back to the elevation, I'm sorry to make you jump around. The stair, in fact, could be the element, right? That is the break apart piece, so that it's just going up, but maybe in that same language as the entry language. I feel like there's a little bit too much going on here, and again, the diagram of the prominent entry maybe not be as clear.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, and I do think that a couple of little minor moves will help this. And I think that you guys are right on with this one in terms of simplifying the massing in the scheme so that there's a common language where I shaded it with red.
Yep.
And then I think we can do it like Rebecca was suggesting with materiality or something else here. I mean, I'm hesitant to just make this element taller just for the sake of trying to make it more prominent. I don't think I want to do that, but we can do something with materiality here or simplifying this or doing something here that draws your eye to this entry. And as we wrap the corner, that same language would carry over to here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that we can do something there.
And,
So
and my tendency when you now that you've put these color blockings on there with that Corbusier idea that if this lobby area and the story above it, that green area now, I tend to want to see that really glassy, but that's just how I think it would work well with your simplified blocking of the massing. But again, that's I'm sort of thinking back to that adjacent project at 600, the Sobrato project, which has that very glassy facade on the large building. And I tend to want this building to be very simple.
I'm all a fan of it.
It feels like it's getting that corner feels a little heavy.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, not to be too critical of my own design here, but I feel like we're trending a lot more modern and contemporary with this office building than we are with other ones. And I feel like maybe this just feels a little suburban kind of, you know, like maybe the entrance to a Pottery Barn or a Williams-Sonoma type of thing.
There you go.
Well, I think it seemed like it was trying to pull some vocabulary or something from the hotel that maybe wasn't necessary for it.
Right. Yeah.
So
Because their intent is that they're different. So
yeah,
I would.
Right.
Okay. Well,
Good.
I think I get the idea of where we're going with this.
Good.
Okay.
So if we're gonna maybe move over to the hotel,
Yep.
I would start the conversation about the hotel in exactly the same way we started the conversation about the office building.
Okay, let me go back.
Because when I go to the diagram has that piece as all green, right? But that is not the reading when I look at this thing. And in fact, I don't think what you talked about either. When you spoke about the piece, what you spoke about was a kind of a piece, and then a piece set back, and then an entry piece. But when I read the elevation in perspective, right, what I really get is 3 vertical pieces on the facade, right? That is not reading as a piece. It's reading as 3 distinct elements along the street edge.
Right.
And again, and one of the things that we said, you know, one of the things we drew was if that was one piece and this portico could somehow get larger, it, you know, to us, that started to say, okay, this is going back to the diagram, right? To me, again, when we first looked at it, it felt too broken up, this elevation. But the diagram is not broken up at all. The diagram is super clear.
Yeah, so I think that what was driving that was the language in the precise plan that we shouldn't have more than 100 foot without a broken plane. So we were taking this massing, which wanted to be a single mass, and then we were trying to break it up into 3 sections to work within that language. That being said, maybe we make those breaks much more subtle, or I mean, if you guys are okay with eliminating them, we're on board with that.
I think that I don't think that those goals are necessarily mutually exclusive. I would urge you as a starting point to maybe study a few different options. One is to Russ's point, how to have from a massing hierarchy standpoint, how to how to better reflect the diagram, which we think, or what we were intuiting, and what I think you may be leading us towards is trying to do is, have a street wall that is relational to itself, and is designed in a way that helps highlight the key corner. And what we're commenting on is when you sort of get down to the building architecture, what we're actually reading is not kind of a sort of a simple street wall that highlights the architecture, but a series of masses that actually sort of detracts attention from the key corner. And so what we want you to study is sort of ways to still give a well-defined, particularly building base that has those breaks and recesses that we desire, and celebrates them from an architectural standpoint as well, because we want them to engage and activate the public street frontage, and to simplify the design of what's happening around and above it in a way that actually lets the key corner stand out, because it's like the key corner isn't drawing our eye. It's sort of the stripy progression of the street wall that is reading most prominently and isn't benefiting the overall character of the hotel.
I mean, I kept drawing this thing that said the eye wants to do that. When we were in our pre-meeting, that's what the eye wants to do. Breaking this thing vertically, precise plan or not, makes the eye do the opposite of that. It makes it do this. And then in that instance, I mean, I suppose, right, one could say, well, if I was going to break it up that way, I could do a series of stepped pieces, right? And that would lead to that thing. But I don't think that's the diagram you drew either, right?
No.
And I don't want, sure, that would lead my eye there, but
So
that's not, I don't know. I guess
does simply putting this like PDF shade over it help clarify it?
yeah, it does. I mean, that wants to be,
I'm on the same page.
that wants to be a thing.
So I'm not sure that it actually necessarily means that center portion above the current outdoor patio needs to necessarily change where it is in plane, but I think look at the color, look at the frame, look at the actual proportion of that outdoor patio, like the elements as put together, like we were saying, don't sort of read as a whole that emphasize these other things. It's as Russ said, we get this episodic thing. We want sort of massing articulation.
It's in fact highlighted by the treatment of the windows, to be honest, right? Because if you look at the the windows, and I think you said this in your presentation, they become vertical, right? And so they are in fact highlighting the verticality and the separation of this as separate. It's vertical here, it's vertical on the end, and in the middle it's not. It's something else. So it's really highlighting this verticality as opposed to this one element.
Correct. What I'm thinking in my head, while we're talking here, is I think that the items that I want to explore and look at are, just like you said, the grouping of the windows. Maybe we leave the vertical orientation of the windows to the tower, to the corner. Just leave them be. Get rid of them up here. Get rid of them down here. Simplify that. Simplify the colors. We'll leave them in plain, because I do think that having that plain break, because my concern is that this is a large mass, and if we don't do anything on it, it's going to
but Barragan would do a plaster mass like that, and it would be awesome.
Yeah.
You're right. We got to get some terracotta colors and
well, I'm not saying we have to do that, but I'm saying,
I know, I'm kidding.
saying there's a kind of a deep punch, or even even fins on I know we typically use nail on for hotels and residential work, but there could be fins that kind of highlight things. There can be this next level of detail that pulls us, or gets more shadow You know,
And
like
we
about
do
it.
have some of those elements to play with too. We do have the recessed patio, which we can make a little bit more special
Yep,
with some type of
Mhm.
a cover over that. We have the separate entrance here into the cafe area, which we can make a little bit more special. So it's not just a blank mass. There are some elements that we can work with to add some interest to it. But I do think that simplifying the massing and keeping it like more like the diagram does draw your eye more towards here. And I
Yeah.
think the other thing I'm looking at in this diagram, which it shows up better, to be honest, in the perspective, but there's a little bit too much of a distinction between the tower above and the lobby element, where I kind of lose a little bit of that. This is a tower where this feels like it's
yeah,
sitting on
we
top
actually
of the
thought if
lobby a
you
little bit.
we actually thought if you brought the awning down a little bit, you
Yeah.
would get,
Right.
it would make the tower feel more vertical,
Mhm.
Yeah.
or something like that. Yeah. We
Yeah.
agree. Yep,
So
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then
it
sort of
already starts to feel more
Yeah.
vertical, and it already engages that
Right.
other mass more.
mhm,
And then, you bring in your landscape team and you guys work together about what's happening in the ground plane at the key
Mhm.
corner that helps highlight highlight this area. Maybe it's just that I didn't see it in renderings and there's more detail in the landscape sheets, but it seemed like that area was missing some treatment.
down here on the corner here.
Yeah, at the
Mhm.
main corner to make it a more special area.
Okay.
So one question I did have, and I was, if when we were looking when I was looking through the package, there were some precedent images that you pulled out of the precise plan, that kind of showed, this sort of base. And one of the things that they did, and I know you're gonna shoot me, but is the upper portion of those became more curtain wall like. Now I know in residential it's tough to do that window wall, but I wonder if the proportions of the glazing on that the upper white volume that pushes back.
Mhm.
Can you bring up that precise plan precedent image for a second?
These
Yeah. So
ones?
if you look at this one here, right? Yeah, how that we have the punch windows, but that upper thing that's set back has more glazing. Now I know for hotel rooms, right? We
Yeah.
would not do this in residential, but I'm wondering if just a step more glazing on that
Mhm.
upper portion separates it a little bit, just separates a little bit. And again, I mean, I'm going to leave it to you to figure that out.
Sure.
But
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, Russ. I was actually just thinking
Mhm.
back to a downtown hotel project that we ran through a couple years ago, and I think that's one of the things that they did. There were key locations where the window proportions increased to sort of set off different masses differently. What would you think? Is it just the top level, or is that something that would make sense?
I
to
think it's
carry
the
through
white,
key
it's the
corner?
white volume.
These
The
Because
white
the white
area.
volume is
Yeah.
a thing.
And the idea being that it just reduces the visual weight, right? I mean,
Yeah,
when you look at
exactly.
that
That's
president
right.
one, the bottom two stories were very solid. They had that precast concrete, and then at the top story, it had a lot more glazing.
It's, but
Right.
Tom, what you just said, the visual weight,
Mhm.
that's exactly
Mhm.
right. That's reducing the visual weight of that upper mass of those
Okay.
two
Mhm.
stories.
All right.
How, I guess maybe tough question for the group. How does this conversation pull the corners into the smaller side elevations? That's the one thing I've been struggling with the most in reviewing the design, because kind of similar to the office building, things seem to get kind of busier, and the strategy,
I think Tom's drawing it right now. I mean, there
Mhm.
it is, and that's gonna, it may be that, or it could be the other volume coming across. That,
This one.
goes through. Yeah, one of the
Mhm.
things I did want to highlight here is like another opportunity. We talked about just a little bit earlier how the key corner design and the ground plane help highlight this, but we've got another probably pretty active entrance area with your sort of porte cochere. It's like semi-open air, and there's a There's, I
Mhm.
feel like there's an opportunity to create a secondary treatment on this facade in particular that kind of relates maybe to what you're doing at the key corner in some way, like at the ground plane, or like in the same way that you have a you know, that covered patio area, or that patio area that we're
Mhm.
going to be working to highlight more strongly on Ellis. Like, you know, each of these frontages could have kind of like the key corner and then another area that sort of activates and enlivens the streetscape. And it seems like on National, you know, it could be this secondary kind of pedestrian entry area that you have.
Yeah.
And again, that there's something you could do in the landscape too, that, you know, people are probably gonna, you know, they're going there to get in their lifts, you know, drop off their cars, they drive here. Like, I think it's gonna be a pretty active area with people moving about.
I
I
agree.
think one
Go ahead.
thing that kind of that I was concerned about in terms of how that drop-off area relates to the lobby, because
Mhm.
almost everyone is going to go to that drop-off area.
Correct.
And it seems like when they come in there, then they're kind of going through the back alleyway to get to the lobby.
Well,
And
so
I'm sure it depends on how it's really laid out, because it does say reception.
correct.
Well,
This is the
okay,
reception desk here.
yeah, you still feel like, to me, I feel like I'm going through, you know, the back door, but that's all, you know, internal design and things too.
Mhm.
How does that get emphasized? Because everyone will go there first.
I guess I wonder, is there a way to kind of, stairs are not my expertise, but is there any way sort of the stair and work area could be more on the interior edge, and we could pull out some of that like movement and circulation towards the front wall of the building? So kind of, you know,
Like flipping that inside.
flipping
Sort of.
that
Except the
all
utility
around.
to here.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
Yeah, it's possible. So this area here that I highlighted is probably
Mhm.
the area that we've worked on back and forth the most, trying to get this vehicle circulation. We initially had 2 curb cuts where you would had one for just drop off and one
Yeah.
for going back and forth quite a bit, but we had to limit it to 1 curb cut. So we kind of joined them together. And then this whole area in here wants to be a really special drop off area. It doesn't
Right.
want to be, you know, it doesn't want to look or feel like the back of house.
Correct.
We just did that on a downtown hotel down here and it was very successful. It looks really nice. But you know, we do it with special lighting in the ceiling, we do it with special paving, we do it with, there's a mural on this particular one that we did in San Luis that goes on the wall and so forth. So I do agree that the interaction between it and the street can be improved. And if we
Mhm.
were to flip it, I mean, we do have some issues with egress and having to exit,
Sure.
you know, like out and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean there aren't other options that are other possibilities we can look into.
Yeah.
So we'll look at that, this area here for sure.
Mhm.
Because as you mentioned, this is the area that everyone's going to use the bulk of the time.
Right.
And so that's why we did put reception over there. So it was really clear where reception was. We tried to make it not feel like the back entrance, but we can continue to look at that and see what we can do there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think there's a similar statement on the side elevations here about wanting to have a simpler and more related design strategy on the short elevations that
Okay.
feels like it works with what you have going on the longer elevations. And then
Mhm.
again, sort of focusing attention on what's happening in the ground plane of the buildings to serve as like a counterpoint and a sort of, you know, to really emphasize pedestrian oriented design in the building as you move around it. I have a couple minor, maybe 1 or 2 minor questions. You highlighted the mural on the back side. is the intent there to work with an artist and have it be a sort of an honest to goodness mural location? Like sometimes folks will put things in plans and, you know, say that it's a mural, but it's really just sort of, you know, they're going to do something interesting in pattern materials. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the intent is there?
No, ideally we would like to work with an artist and come up with something interesting there that's an actual, you know, piece of public art that's more so than just, you know, like some different textured CMU blocks or something like that. That's not what we intend in there. We'd like to create some type of a piece of public art.
Okay. And out of curiosity, just because on at least a lot of residential projects, we get questions about you know, from our decision makers and community about using roof for active open space and such. Is there any potential to do something useful on the rooftop above the parking area, or are there some challenges that aren't obvious?
There's a lot of challenges. we initially proposed it for an outdoor area, and the structural engineer and the contractor came back and threw rocks at us because it's a parking structure with a non-load bearing roof over it. If we added, you know, like massive weight on top of it, it became a big ordeal. And then we were possibly looking at it
Well, you
for
have to go to 100-pound live load, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
and the system's not designed anywhere near that.
Yeah.
And then we also looked at it in terms of using it for our biofiltration system. So because we have to treat the roof water, and that created similar issues. So what we ended up doing was we're just going to be able to we'll be able to put some solar on it. We'll be able to put some equipment on it, but that's about it on top of it. And then this is way more in the weeds than we need to get for this. But from a building code perspective, there is a firewall separation between the two. So there are different types of construction and different buildings from a building code perspective.
Okay.
Where this is
Oh,
an all steel and non-combustible building, and this is a wood frame
Mhm.
building over a podium. So there were some code issues there that complicated it.
yeah.
So yeah, I think the other thing I wanted to talk about, just to highlight, because I think we kind of glossed over it except for that white portion, but do really think about how you are designing and using the shape and size of windows, and detailing, you know, giving treatment to those windows as an opportunity to add sort of shadow and texture to the building mass in a way that complements building architecture. You know, I think everyone knows when you look at hotels, you always know what a hotel it's a
Mhm.
hotel building when you
Sure.
see it, and a lot of that has to do with the window design, and you explained some of that in your presentation and the why of it. But I'd really like to encourage you to think about how there can be some creativity in the window design to make it feel a little bit less recognizably hotel-like, in that way that I say people recognize, but it's usually not recognizing in a terribly positive manner. So that's just one other item. We don't typically tend to dive in deep on details and materials, but I think it's important for this type of project to touch on it at least briefly, to kind of set the stage for the later conversation. And then, you know, again, to highlight that I think in both buildings, we spent more time talking about it on the office building. We want to really strongly encourage you to be creative with your ideas around the materials, to really, you know, make the right area, use them in the right ways to make the areas that you want to stand out. I think at this stage, we're more focused on the massing and articulation comments that we provided today, but I think everyone, and Russ and Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't sort of inclined to think that the metallic truss bed treatment at the corner was maybe going to be enough, and that it may need something a little bit more different. But
I think the next, you know, there's a level of detailing, for instance, around windows and these things, which can allow for the introduction of other materials. You know, and so I just think it's that next level of push, because otherwise it's everything else is just plaster, you know, or ephes actually is what
Yeah.
the drawing said.
Okay. Well, we'll look at that for sure. I think right now, like you said, we're focused on the massing and making clear statements and making sure that the architecture communicates what we're diagramming and
Yeah, I think,
so
you know, just again, Tom, I'm
we'll
gonna
carry it there.
say we couldn't have had a kind of good discussion that we had today if you didn't provide the diagrams, right?
Right.
And it's like I
Sure.
harp on it every time we have these, and you'd be surprised at how few architects diagram things to make clear their intent so that we can be helpful, you know?
Well, I'll be honest with you. If we don't start with this, we struggle in general. You know, I mean,
We're the same. That's why I'm always wondering why we don't see them.
yeah. No, I mean, we bubble diagram stuff out all the time, whether it's in plan or whether it's in elevation or whatever it happens to be, just circulation, and just getting a clear concept from the beginning helps inform all the decisions moving forward. So
Yep,
I think
absolutely.
we're timely and
Yeah,
we're talking
yeah.
the same language.
Yeah,
So
I think if you don't do that, you end up going directly into the weeds.
Correct.
Long before
Correct.
you should.
So yeah, I think that wraps up, you know, the main things that we wanted to chat with you about today.
Okay.
And, you know, I'll just close just as a next step sort of recommendation. This is something we recommend, with almost every project that comes through, is, that, you know, we are happy and encourage you to, sort of, you know, work at a more schematic, sketchy level, with studying, you know, revisions and collaborating with your project planner, who has easy access to me, on working revisions, and find that sort of, iteration with staff is really beneficial to, you know, avoid this thing where we sort of end up trading paper and sort of you're working to, you know, revise 100 sheets before we feel like we're all on the same page as far as the revisions heading in the right direction. So, encourage you to work with your project planner in that manner.
Oh, absolutely, will do. And I'd be amiss if I didn't mention how great it has been working with Ellen. She's a superstar, and we really appreciate all the help that she's brought to the table so far.
Awesome. We like to hear compliments. We tend to hear the opposite. So I'll appreciate that in Ellen's honor. So yes, thank you everyone.
Thank you, guys.
yeah,
Thank
with-
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a
With
lot.
that, we're gonna wrap
you.
up item 2.1 and move on to item 2.2, which is returning to us for some final review. This is, oh dear, I accidentally clicked on a link. Hold on a second. This is a request for 2 personal storage buildings at 1040 Terabella Avenue. I'm gonna just again take a moment and try everyone's patience by doing a series of promotions of pertinent staff for the second application, so bear with me. Okay, so I think I have everyone up. Looks like we have a fairly small audience, but, you know, just as a reminder, welcome a short presentation from the applicant team. Typically when, you know, project is returning to DRC, the most beneficial information is just, you know, highlighting the key things that have been addressed since you last joined us. I'll open up for any public comment we have and then bring it back for discussions and what we anticipate will be final recommendations. So, Brian and Jonathan and Ellis, take it away.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm in a hotel room, so hopefully the Wi-Fi keeps up. Jonathan's running the PowerPoint just in case. Just a little bit of a reminder in history. Jonathan, can you go into presentation mode? It's pretty small when it's not, when you see the notes.
Is that working now? What
It's,
screen is it showing?
you got to put it in presentation mode.
It is, it's just showing on the wrong screen. Give me 1 second here.
You can tell it to flip.
Yeah.
So while he's doing that, I'll give you a little bit of background. This project is a collaboration with Alta Housing, where we're donating land to Alta Housing to increase their affordable housing bedroom count. In exchange, we're re-entitling our site to densify from what is existing drive-up storage, you know, the first generation product that is a bunch of garage doors all next to each other, to a pair of buildings, market permitting. First one, I am very confident will likely be built, a 6-story, and again, is subject to market conditions, whether or not the 4-story will be built. But given how difficult it is to get storage in this market, I would be surprised if that doesn't get built as well. So this project's been going on for 4 years, 5 years, something like that. And we've gone through many different meetings and review boards. This is hopefully, you know, one of the last ones before we sail off to our planning commission hearing and city council hearing early next year. Right, Edgar? So when we brought this to both planning commission and city council, they had, and granted, I know that this doesn't drive this body's decision-making, because you are, you know, scrubbing the details and making sure that the general vision of what it's supposed to be is executed properly. But both through planning commission and city council, we had unanimous support for the architectural design. Almost to the person, they were shocked that a storage building could look this good. And a reminder, this is a storage building, not an office building, not an apartment complex, not a Google headquarters. And so there's been a great deal of support, and I know that a lot of the comments that we've seen out of the first DRC meeting, and also in some of the staff comments, are really getting to the details. So we'll let Jonathan go through. Jonathan, you can go to the next slide, please. This is the configuration of the Alta Housing and PS properties as they stand today. We are the red/orange outline, and Alta Housing is the blue. Go to the next one. Jonathan, you go to the next slide.
Yep.
Nope.
Is it not selecting it?
I don't see it, but that, oh, there we go. There we go. So, and then this is the reconfigured site where we give a ½ acre of our property. We also give Alta Housing the Terabella frontage. And it helps, our buildings help to be a buffer between the freeway and the overpass and Alta Housing's property. And as a reminder, as we're going through design, we do have an overpass that covers the majority of the site and gets up to be, you know, 2.5 stories tall. So from a realistic standpoint, when you're looking straight on the building, the site, the elevation view will never happen here, just because there's no way to see it unless we have flying cars some days and we remove the freeway. But if you go to the next slide, I think that's it. I think at this point we hand it over to Jonathan in a second. So I mentioned some of this 2-phase project. The building on the left is phase 1, building on the right is phase 2. Total building area just over 400,000 square feet. Heights for these 2 buildings are 84 feet for the 6-story and 63 feet for the 4-story. And the FAR is just under 2.5, which is the city limit. And I already mentioned it provides a buffer and et cetera. I'm happy to answer any questions about the operational nature of the facility if that helps going through the design. And I'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Beautiful. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody, for welcoming us back and taking a look at the changes in elevations that we've done here. Today, what we like to obviously walk away from is a decision, but also there's some very kind of minor pointed questions and comments that we got from the last DRC review. And so happy to go through and do the presentation. We can go back and forth, but as well as if anybody wants to add comments as we're talking about these different features, as we kind of go slide to slide, happy to entertain those comments there as well.
I would just say,
go
yeah,
ahead.
go through the slides, and looking at the attendee list, I suspect we may not have public comment, but let's run through the presentation and then ask for public comment, and then we can run through questions and so forth.
Okay, that sounds
Yeah,
wonderful.
and I don't think there was any public comment in between DRC hearings
No.
either, just to point that out.
Okay, so just as a reminder, where we started with the gatekeeper application is the elevation on top, so don't worry, we didn't go back to that design. Just as a reminder, here is where we were with the latest package that you guys have seen and reviewed. You know, we increased a lot of the glazing, gave patterns, really took that feedback from the last 2 years of comments on elevations, and have really come a long ways. In our last meeting, it was great to hear that there was pretty strong support here, and just some things we could actually do to simplify some of the elevation features and kind of make it a little more holistic overall. So looking at left to right, this was the last DRC review and the elevations that we've made changes to. You know, so one of the biggest ideas here from the beginning was to blend this more into the Terabella neighborhood, which has a mixture of uses and different character. The site is zoned industrial, but the building definitely appears, you know, much more like a tech building than a self-storage or industrial product. We've used a lot of different materials here that don't clash, but kind of coordinate with each other, and we're trying to actually simplify that just a little bit here, and had some good comments from you guys last meeting. So looking at the north and south elevations of this is building 1, we had kind of an overarching comment to kind of simplify things, as well as make it a little more symmetrical, and trying to tie all the elevations and materials together in the moves that we're making, which I thought were really good. So happy that we're going that direction. One was, you know, the base of the building where we had the split face CMU, and it seemed to be a little bit busy. So in the upper left here in the north elevation, we had a couple of bandings and then breaks. It seemed a little bit, you know, discombobulated in a way. So we've simplified that on both buildings, all elevations, to a more solid base, because we still have these vertical elements that come down and touch the ground that help give the rhythm and pattern. So it's not just like this podium feel, but it does simplify it. So made the changes to that CMU to ground it. On the south elevation, one of the comments was, you know, to take a look at these elements. I'll call them the L, the inverse L. And, you know, there's a little bit of differentiation between all these different parapets, and maybe we could simplify that. So we actually pulled them to the stepping of the building, to the masking of the corners or a vertical element, and tried to make them more symmetrical as well. So I'll call it maybe the tertiary masking element in the center where we put the glazing. We actually made them mirrors of each other on both sides, so that we didn't have kind of 2 different rhythms on both, and it simplifies the design a little bit. Let me get to the next one. And it also just helps with the symmetry. So we do still have an asymmetrical because of the use and the corners and the views overall looking onto the site, but we want to have something that gives you a regular rhythm and pattern. I think that helps do that quite well. Looking at the east and western elevations of that same building, number 1, again, simplified the CMU split face base of the building. Not a whole lot else changed on the eastern elevation, but we did receive comments on the western, which faces the street frontage there. And, you know, it seemed like the mural was a little bit small, and that there wasn't this kind of balance on either side of the mural. So we made that change, extended that down, and have that mirrored and made that mural larger. And again, that mural is a placeholder. That's not what we're proposing. Very similar in nature, what we talked about previously. Here's the perspective of that design from the overpass, the 101, driving southeast. And then from the dead end cul-de-sac here from Linda Vista, looking at the main corner of the building, would be the northwest corner of the building. This is building number 2, 4-story. Similar comments in nature here. So we looked at simplifying that base again. And one of the other overarching, mostly just for this building, was that there was a disconnection between the upper glazing and where our loading lobby and entry doors were. And so we shifted those on that north elevation to be in line. So it gives some balance to those facade features. It's a little bit misrepresented in a flat elevation. That, a true perspective, you kind of won't get all of this because it actually is a 3-step process in the building. But when you look at it overall, you kind of get the parts and pieces put together, and it feels good. Right? On the south elevation, again, we continued the inverted L's to the vertical massing elements and simplified the design on both sides so that it was balanced. One of the other comments was there seemed to be a little disconnect or an opportunity miss. We have the horizontal eyebrow elements on the corners, and it wasn't necessarily carrying through as strongly. You can see here in the south elevation previously where we took that purple banding accent in the corners and we didn't do it between the 3rd and 4th floor. And now we do each one of these kind of horizontal floor elements. For building 2 here, the east and west elevations, we continued that purple accent around the corners, kind of tying one elevation into the other, as well as tying into those vertical kind of main massing movements on the facade. And we shifted some of the glazing as well. So we had some more storefront that was spandrel along San Rafael, and it wasn't aligned with the vertical elements above, and so we shifted that to be more in line and balanced. Here's a perspective from the end of that cul-de-sac at San Rafael. You can see the massing of the new housing project that is happening next door. That really is pretty close and kind of covers up that south facade. And then just to touch base on the material board. I know you guys had the physical material board was made available. Hopefully we've got their hands on that and gives you more a representation on the true colors of these. I know digital material boards are always a challenge, right? Because everybody's screen is different. And even Brian was poking me yesterday because he's like, is that pink? And I'm like, no, sir, that's your standard off-white that goes with the gray cool color scheme. So these are just representative. One thing that did change is we took away those extra CMU base colors. So that's the only changes that have been made to the material palette. Wanted to address the screening comments. These are actually, these rooftop units are double screened in a way. So we have natural screening, which is why I put the sections on here, which are made available in that final package that you guys have. Quite step back in as much as possible. So a little bit hard to see here, but where these blue clouds are, these darker spaces, we are grouping the MEP equipment on the rooftop and setting them from the parapet as far as possible. Of course, at this point in the design, we haven't fully engineered the building. So working with the MEP, they give us some preliminary locations, max height of the units themselves, and we're being very conservative. So in these, we're showing 6-foot screens around those mechanical units, in which none of the units themselves are going to be over 5 feet, and they might actually be shorter. So this is kind of worst case scenario. What I like to do to make sure that, our parapet's going to screen it from, every angle on the ground. Them being set back so far, really you do not see them from the ground unless you're at eye level with the parapet, which they stick over just slightly, in all honesty. The screening is integral to the building as well in the design, because the corrugated panels that we're proposing to clad those units with are actually going to be similar in nature to the facade materials that you see. So it's not foreign. A lot of times in these buildings, when they do a metal screen on the roof, it doesn't happen anywhere else on the building, but we're actually utilizing that as an important architectural material feature on the facade of the building. So they really should, blend in, even if when you could see it in taller buildings around or in flying cars, like Brian said. Landscape comments, we really took these seriously. We tried to take a look at what we could do to address your guys' concerns. So the landscape architect reviewed the planting list and spent a lot of time making sure we had as many native species as possible. And in some instances, you know, we get kind of conflicting comments where, you know, we want to pack on as many trees as possible, but we also got the comment to make sure that these are going to be sustainable over the years, right? So that they actually don't just survive, but they thrive and provide adequate canopy. And we heard that loud and clear, that adequate canopy and maximizing that on site is a big move. The nice thing about this site and the way that it's oriented that works out well for the operation is that all this parking lot is actually on the north side of the building. 6-story building, and then next door being a 4-story that we'll see next, really is going to give natural shading to this area. And really it's going to be the roof and the facade that take a brunt of the punishment. And having white TPO roof, and then of course black solar panels, which we're doing on purpose to gain that sun's natural energy, is really going to be where that energy is focused, and not so much on the pavement on the north side of the building. But that being said, we still have a lot of trees and cover. So the changes between the two, you guys have probably seen, is we reduced the parking stalls that still work with the operation. Public storage is still fine with the number that we're proposing now, but it allowed us to do a couple things. One, pulled this trash enclosure back so we could naturally screen it a little bit better. So we took away the parking stalls there, put a big tree. These are also the stormwater treatment areas in these triangles. The site's pretty limited on where we can actually treat the stormwater. And the landscape architect went back to the well, so to speak, and figured out what kind of tree would actually survive in these planting areas. So we've specified a species here that can actually be planted, so we added more trees. We also spaced them out, as well as adding some different varieties. Another comment was, trees along the south and north property line. We were staying out of that. There's no trees there now. There's no plantings at all. It's just kind of a curb that goes down and collects runoff water. We have low planting, and then we added trees. It is far enough away from that main line. It is still in the easement area, but we can get some smaller rooted trees along that property line. So added a bunch there. So overall, we reduced 4 stalls on building 1 here and added a lot of trees, screened the trash enclosure, and we think overall this worked pretty well. For building 2, similar in nature, added trees along that north property line, took advantage of any of these landscape areas where we could add trees and get more canopy area, and then we removed all of the parking stalls along the furthest eastern side of this building. We don't have loading lobbies in that area, so it's not necessarily as useful for the occupants or the tenants that'll be in the space. So we added more trees for screening, and I think that was successful. We pulled the gate back and made it parallel or perpendicular to the facade, so it's off of the frontage a little bit further, as you can see in the renderings that we provided. And yeah, we just spruced it up a little bit and got some more tree canopy coverage.
Great,
That's
thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
So I'll just quickly turn my attention to our attendee list, see if anyone in the audience today, by raising your hand, has any comments or questions to share with the DRC. And seeing no hands raised, I'll just bring it back quickly to the DRC for questions and discussions. So, I'll kick things off. I think, as you guys highlighted in your presentation, we had last time around some pretty specific and directed areas that we had asked for you to make some refinements in the design, building off the fine start that you had already. And so I think as far as building comments are concerned today, it's mostly just a few targeted tweaks for the improvements that you did make. And, again, I'll highlight that, we found that the revisions you made at a very high level to be fairly successful in addressing our prior feedback. And again, there are a few locations that we want to talk with you, a few locations and a few more detailed topics that we want to speak with you in more detail about today. Just quickly, with a couple questions that are more site and landscape focused, along in front of building 1, along the sound wall to the highway, is the identification of smaller sized trees there just because of the amount of planting area you have, or can you describe a little bit more about why you only have sort of much smaller canopy trees in those locations?
Yeah, great question. I'm not the landscape architect, but my understanding of that was that, yes, to actually have a tree that will thrive in there in the root ball system to get enough moisture, it takes a little bit smaller tree and the canopy is not going to get as large. So that is why the selection is what it is.
Okay. I think one of the things that I'd like to recommend today is, I know you probably have stretched your landscape architect to their limits, but I think knowing the feedback that we received previously, and that you were able to sort of remove more spaces over at building 2, I would encourage as a final recommendation for you to work with your landscape team to see if, like, even in just like a few appropriate locations along that stretch, you might be able to find and intersperse a tree that's a bit taller and has a little bit more height than the I think it's an ironwood that you're showing there. And maybe it's something that sort of spatially can correspond to points where you don't have taller trees on the sort of more on the building side. I think closest to Linda Vista you kind of have it covered, but there's that sort of stretch in the sort of next 2/3 of the building, which I think would be a recommended area of focus. The other question I have is, I keep on seeing that tree shown in a transformer location, and my experience is that of anyone, PG&E and or transformer stuff tends to not play well with trees. So I just want to double check that you're confident that tree can be planted there.
Yeah, I mean, these building footprints are pretty large, so the scale is a little bit tricky. But we do have proper clearance from the trunk of a full-grown tree to that transformer for proper access all the way around it. So we believe that'll be, I mean, it's as much screen as we can get with still getting them access.
Okay. Because I think it would be a loss to lose that tree there. The last question I have, and how wide, I think this is the last question, how wide is that sidewalk area along the far east edge of building 1? It seems like it's kind of a back of house and not going to be highly utilized for loading, because the access is on the parking side and you just have that stair in the back.
Yeah, so maybe if I go to overall plan, I think we have one up here up front. Here, so I believe it's 9 feet total, giving enough buffer room from the fire access and ladder apparatus to be able to exit the building properly. So we butted up against the fire access,
Right.
the fire route. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess well, the one question I had there is that, like, it's the obvious spot, and maybe especially sort of more on the north edge, where it's like, oh man, it'd be really great to get some trees in there. And I've been thinking recently about how lovely the trees in our downtown are, that are in a sort of a really urban kind of graded condition. So I wondered if like a tree grate style tree planting might be an option there, kind of recognizing that this particular stretch of sidewalk is probably not going to be the stretch where people are pushing large carts of stuff just because of where the building access points are. And so that might be another kind of final opportunity to get a tree or two in.
We can definitely look at that. And really the only reason for that sidewalk is to connect the pedestrian frontage to that back exit stair. So
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that it encumber the entire sidewalk, but that, you know, in a 9, especially if you have 9 feet, and you do something that's more of an urban tree grate, that could be another opportunity space.
Good.
Yeah, and I think those were most of my tree related questions. Yeah, a minor thing about the security gate. I definitely appreciate the work that you've done to inset it. I think we're probably talking about a matter of feet, but you know, my preference on the building 2 side would be just to make sure that starting point for that security gate and fencing isn't forward of the building face. And it looked
Right.
like it maybe was a little bit closer to the street than the building. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like you have a glass facade that's wrapping that point too, right?
Correct.
So, yeah, I'd ask you to study whether it's feasible to inset it further to more sort of appropriately correspond to the building architecture and ensure that the building is the thing that is most apparent from the street and not the security fence and gate. Now that I'm thinking about it more, I feel like it's even a little bit more odd for that to kind of be intersecting a clear storefront kind of condition at that northeast corner of building 2.
Sure.
Yeah,
we can definitely take a look at that.
yeah. And then this is connected to a pretty standard condition of approval that we have, but very, very often we end up in this circumstance. And I think it was something that was brought up last time around where, you know, at the building permit stage, we find that, you know, we might have been overly optimistic at planning entitlements about like where above ground utilities are located and where water lines are. So kind of building on the city's the planning standard condition requiring landscape screening of utilities. I would just like to reemphasize through a design recommendation that you work closely with planning staff on the utility layout and make adjustments as needed to maximize the planting area and screening of those above ground equipment locations along frontages, because we often find that the clearances and other things and other like standard detail related requirements make it really, really hard for us to get adequate screening of those utilities. So want to make sure it stays on your radar. So I'm going to make that part of our final recommendations on design conditions. Because I don't want sort of the potential issue to come out of nowhere. And I'm just noting one last question, and then we can quickly dive into the building things. We know you're going to have a temporary office location during it's principally just for during building 1 construction, correct?
Correct.
And I know that staff previously had sort of raised this question of what you could do to incorporate San Rafael frontage planting into the first phase of construction, both to improve the condition around the temporary office trailer, but also with uncertainty around the timing of building 2 and the desire to have a more polished streetscape next to the Alta project. Wanted to know more about what you see as sort of challenges to being able to do frontage planting along San Rafael in phase 1.
Yeah, so in where we have building 2 here, this is obviously the phase 2 side of the site, ultimate development, right, as we all know. During phase 1 construction, yes, that will be a temporary location and will go away quite quickly. And nothing else on the site is changing at that point. So that means no, grading and utilities and all of that will not have taken place yet. And working with the landscape architect and the civil engineer and seeing what those current, grades are, we don't know where that's going to land at this point, but we do know that there is going to have to be a change that happens during construction of phase 2, which would pretty much mean we'd have to redo the frontage on phase 2 side of the site as soon as we actually went into construction on that side of the site. So it seemed like kind of a defeat to make street and frontages on the opposite side of the site than we're actually doing for phase 1, and then have to redo it again in the future when phase 2 would move forward.
Okay, so the issue is principally like anticipated future grading.
Future grading, impact to the ground around it, right? So your root ball is kind of double the diameter of the tree canopy, and that's going to be interrupted and pretty much kill those trees off during phase 2. A very difficult thing to do. And so, leaving that side of the site as is kind of the plan at this point.
Okay.
Hey, Jonathan, I think there's a site plan that shows phase 2 when it's not done somewhere in this.
Was it in this deck?
I thought
No, unfortunately.
you can go back to that one.
Okay.
The Reese, there we go. So a lot of these buildings are going to have to be cut back when in order for Alta Housing to even have a project, right? So we have to demo a series of our buildings. We also have to demo the Alta Housing house. And then we record a lot line adjustment that provides the ultimate blue rectangle to Alta Housing. And so we're going to be tearing that back, but we're not tearing farther back because that would require demolishing buildings that may never go away.
Right.
So unfortunately, as it sits from a phase 1, phase 2 perspective, there is an outside chance phase 2 never gets built, and you're looking at what you're looking at. And we're not tearing more down than we are required to transfer the land to Alta Housing.
Yeah, no, like I said, we're not suggesting that and haven't been suggesting, we're not talking about sort of the balance of this area, here. Really what we were talking about in that staff generated comment is, a recognition that, this is ballparking somewhere around here. You're putting a temporary trailer for, an office. And so there's an area of the phase 2 site that isn't sort of encumbered by your continued operations there while phase 1 is under construction and in operation. And so, and sort of with, access coming in here per plan, the thought was really just, wow, this area kind of like would finish the frontage along San Rafael, and have something attractive for finishing off like literally that very front portion between where you're showing your temporary office trailer and the San Rafael frontage, and our hope that there might be sort of a creative opportunity to get landscaping in early there for all of those reasons I stated earlier, both the temporary operations, the adjacent development of the Alta property, and the sort of the uncertainty around phase 2 happening or happening early. So it wasn't meant as something that you'd have to seed through the entirety of phase 2. It was really focused on that frontage area right along San Rafael.
So I just want to make sure I'm following you. You want us to improve as the landscape plan in this package represents, or you're just requesting an interim condition that softens the edge there?
Well, so yeah, I think, if we were able to get something close, like even just the tree plantings along that frontage, like that would be the ideal scenario. But yeah, the fallback would be thinking about what interim landscaping could be accomplished to make it nicer along that frontage and sort of feel more cohesive with what Alta will be constructing more on a building 1 timeline, or hopes to be constructing on a building 1 timeline, so that we have a nice face to the street. sort of throughout the project timeline.
I mean,
As much as
the obvious statement is that literally on the other side of the cul-de-sac is not appealing at all. So like we'd be finishing the one edge, but you still have half of the cul-de-sac, which is going to be an unfinished business park that is in reasonable condition at best.
Yeah, and as soon as someone comes in with an application, we'd be having the very same conversation with them. So the final recommendation from this body is, in view of what we know about sort of the Alta project and your project and the timing, is that if it is possible, we would like to see the phase 2, again, it's just the frontage planting incorporated into the phase 1 construction timeline. But barring that, we are recommending that you work with staff on interim planting along that frontage, based on the temporary office trailer that is there and connected to the adjacent developments, so that on half of San Rafael we have an attractive streetscape environment for visitors to your site, customers to your site, and visitors and residents of the Alta project immediately next to you.
Yeah, we won't have any customers entering from that site, and our building will be done before Alta Housing's likely. And the main office for the overall facility, whether it's only phase 1 is done or phase 1 and phase 2 are done, is in the phase 1 building. So that temporary trailer is quite literally in interim condition because we have to tear down our office for this facility in order to deliver land to Alta Housing.
Understood.
And then, not to beat a dead horse, but I'm thinking that, one of the kind of the hardships here for public storage to be able to do this frontage improvement is it's not just making a few tree plantings, but the upgrade of the offsite and the location of the sidewalk per code is offset from where it's shown now. And I'm thinking that maybe an interim piece is, if public storage would agree to it and feel comfortable, is having some interterm tree plantings along here without doing the frontage upgrades for this entire, incurring that cost of phase 2 frontage improvements on phase 1 building, right?
Oh yeah, and when I refer to that, I'm talking about the plantings and not all the sidewalks. That's a public works. And once you get into the sidewalk zone, that's a public works sort of area. I'm merely referring to the tree plantings and ideally something underneath the trees.
Yeah, and so the tree planting, that's another reason, but the location of them to the street frontage now is not going to be conducive. It's not in the same location, right, as the ultimate build out. So they would be somewhere off of that sidewalk area, and that sidewalk would kind of go right where the proposed trees are. So it would be an interim solution of some plantings there that would have to be removed or relocated if possible, if phase 2 would move forward.
And then on the building design, I think we just had a few key locations that we wanted to discuss with you. Could you bring up the building 2 south elevation? I think is probably the best place to talk about it. So
okay.
Linda, Russ, I don't know if you want to sort of lead the way on this, since I've been monologuing on sort of our site notes, but I think at a very high level, like I led with, we were pleased to see the progress that you all made in refining the designs. I think that the few areas we want to talk to you about in the facades, this is the south elevation of building 2 is probably the biggest one, is just noting that the kind of like the proportions are a little awkward around the inverted L, I think is what you called them, features, where it seemed to us that there were ways to kind of rectify this a little bit more to give a more proportional treatment. So that
Yeah, I can go ahead. I would preface that by saying we really appreciated how you responded to our comments and that you've done a lot of good work on really making these buildings really come together and they're, aligning elements and centering doors, that type of thing has made a big difference in how it looks. So thank you very much for doing all that. The comment on the south elevation is that we were thinking those inverted L's, if they were pushed further apart so that middle piece that has the 7 on it was a little wider. And not really change anything else, but just push those L's a little further apart, that we thought then you would get a nicer rhythm of the facade.
I think what we were commenting on is that the length of the brow relative
Correct.
to the height, it's just a bit too long.
Correct.
Feels a
So
little
if that
heavy
could
at
just
the
be
end.
spread apart and that number 7 plaster you get more of that in the middle, that would be.
That's
Happy to do that.
correct. I think that was the
I think that
most
was it.
significant
Yeah, I
comment
think the
we
only other
had.
thing was we had like a little bit of back and forth on like this kind of like double reveal panel being a little bit atypical. Like at the corner, it's usually like either a single one or you get a single and then you get like one of those like narrower gray, like light gray segments next to it. So
Right.
like we were kind of noticed the proportion there as well.
Yeah, so I think we'll take that opportunity, that feedback that this pause space would really benefit in the kind of cantilevered L shape, feeling a little bit longer in proportion here. We do skinny it up so it doesn't quite feel that way, but in elevation here, I definitely understand what you're saying. And we would take that opportunity, and I think I'd reduce this and do something more along the lines of what happens like here,
Yeah.
right? I know what you were talking
Exactly.
about.
Yep,
So
exactly.
yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
And we kind of went back and forth on a similar topic on building 1. It's I think less of an issue there because you have sort of a more regular pattern of other elements. I think Russ was commenting that the proportion on building 1 when you carry it down to ground level, it kind of has kind of a square proportion which works. So I think all things being equal in the end, we're comfortable with building 1 as it stands. But if you want to take a final look at that and see if there are any final tweaks you'd make there, we sort of will give you the discretion to do that. Broadly, the layout works and the proportions are more comfortable on building 1 in the south elevation.
That sounds good. And the funny thing is you look at these and you don't really think about it, but one's a 6-story, one's a 4-story. So the proportions of the rectangle to the square change dramatically. So trying to keep the similar elements and not notice it is kind of the key, right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. We had a couple minor color material things, and again recognizing that the electronic color board is always a challenge. Our observation on the purple, which I don't know if it was part of the proposal last time and we just didn't notice because we were focused on other things or not. I think that the sentiment of us all is that the purple maybe is a little bit too light, that it wants to be sort of a darker version of itself. I think it's a combination of darker appearance and also saturation. It ended up feeling a bit, I think, almost too pastel, particularly next to the orange. I'm not suggesting you go with Raven's purple, despite the fact that I am from Baltimore. But
That's
yeah,
really what she was. That's really what she was.
So
I'm
Rebecca,
not
just
I'm not actually a Ravens fan, but so
She's trying to sneak that in there.
yeah.
Rebecca, just so you're aware, on the purple, that is actually a PS color.
okay.
You'll see our old facilities. I used to have what I think is not attractive is sort of the 3-colored stripe would be orange, purple, and yellow together.
God.
Yes, whoever, yeah, exactly. Whoever contemplated that was, thought it was, looked like the sunset. They're billionaires. They're billionaires and I'm not, so I can't say if they're wrong. But that color is a PS color. And so when you guys all wanted to see color on this building other than orange, we specifically selected a color that is within the PS branding palette.
Okay.
And that
One
was a
thing that's
comment.
interesting is, I'm looking at 2 different screens. I have my laptop screen and then I have a larger monitor. And on my laptop, the purple looks more pastel. On my large monitor, it's a very nice, subtle grade color. So I have no idea what the real color is, and staff will be dealing with the color swatches.
Yeah, I
Well,
think,
I think Jonathan mentioned that in his presentation that I was giving him a hard time yesterday because I thought that the tan looked pink.
Yeah.
And that's why you all should have a material board. Well,
Yeah.
so you're actually seeing the color swatch.
yeah, even
not-
then, yeah, seeing it in natural light and on the actual material it's going to be on, something a little bit bigger than like 2 inches by 2 inches, you get a much more true sense of the colors. So I think what we'll do with that is, again, our from an overall composition standpoint, I understand that this is a public storage color. Frequently when we look at other precise plans, we actually have specific language about adopting brand identity to some extent, obviously working collaboratively to make things feel compatible to Mountain View. So that there's always a conversation there, but I think we'll defer the final color selection for those accents to the color mock-up, and may recommend in the end that we revert to a more kind of solid dark gray or something that picks up on the
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. So the reason that second accent color came up was, previous conversations with, I can't remember the name of the advisory board. They wanted to see something there, but I think it would be wonderful, and excuse me if I'm wrong or correct me, but if there was a recommendation that the purple went to a more neutral color, darker band of the gray that goes in that cool gray color family, I think we'd all be happier.
So yeah, I think we'll make the recommendation to evaluate the purple through a mock-up inspection with an alternative neutral gray accent as an alternative color for those features. A minor note, I know it tends to be standard, but I do want to make sure that the opaque spandrel application occurs on the the back face of the window. Systems there. I've been surprised on a couple of occasions to see it on like phase 2 or something like that for a dual pane window system, and we want it as recessed as possible in the system.
Yep.
The last topic we had for you today is the rooftop screening. What staff I think observed in the plans is that the structures of your solar system look like they may exceed the lowest parapet heights that you have in the project. Is that something that you can verify offhand?
Sorry, say that again. The solar system.
You have a solar panel areas on the roofs of these buildings, and there's a structure typically associated with those panels.
Yeah,
that looked like it was taller than the parapets.
no, those will definitely be lower than any roof screening that we have here. The intent would not to be stick above the parapet. I remember we just got permit on another project, and I think those are the low base standoff, right, just to get over the slope and get you enough angle for those panels. So we have pretty tall parapets here, and those should, at true elevation, be cover the solar panel system.
Okay. And I know you said that this is a conservative take on your mechanical equipment locations. Is there sort of any further consolidation of the rooftop equipment that you can envision would be feasible. The reason, so the background for this is our code is pretty straightforward and says that in new buildings in particular, there needs to be mechanical equipment screen of all rooftop equipment. So ergo the check on the solar structure, and B, when we have new construction, the idea is that it's sort of, that's the opportunity to create a mechanical screen that covers everything needed in the simplest, most architecturally compatible way. And so it's atypical that we see or approve these areas where you've got these little pods of mechanical screens scattered around a rooftop in a new construction project. So
so for this type of building, the way we implement HVAC is very different than probably the majority of the new construction you're analyzing. We cool at 85 degrees and we heat at 55. So we don't have a gigantic load for equipment.
right.
We also spread them out so that they can go down to the variable, the VAV units below, as opposed to, a big office building, you'd have 1 or 2 or 3 boxcars up there and they're consolidated in the middle. We've also spread them out so that we can fit solar. And we try to push them back from the parapet edge so that you really don't see them. We've got roof screening that is substantially matching the building itself from a color scheme standpoint, but at the same time not pushing them back so far that we can't put solar in, because I think solar is important for everybody, not for some design on something that I don't, short of another tower right next door, that no one's going to see these screens, especially from the freeway edge. So that's why they're located.
Yeah,
I
I think I understand your rationale for how you've laid it out. I would encourage never say the words "never gonna see," because every time I've assumed that or said that, I've been proven wrong when a project's been built. So the key thing is making sure that the key thing was really to verify that your solar installation, which is the largest component of what you're showing in your roof plan, is not going to exceed the height of the lowest point of any parapet on this building. I will ask Edgar to just make sure that that's sort of reflected in our design conditions, so that any final design that comes forward, because we have often found that there's change from entitlement assumptions to actual rollout of solar installs is consistent with that. Along with that, we'll just continue to say that as you finalize your mechanical equipment layout to encourage the lowest possible heights that you can manage in that equipment, and inset as much as possible from any adjacent parapet, while providing for the solar locations you've identified. So
Absolutely. I think all that makes a lot of sense. No issues there. We don't want to see it either, right?
Yeah. So this is something that is different than what we typically require and recommend, but I understand, Brian, that your strategy for heating and cooling these buildings is different than other commercial and industrial buildings that we see, and I'm so willing to have staff work with you on that within the conditions that I just spoke through. So I think that really just wraps it up. Again, thank you for the work you've done on this building. You've been responsive at every step. So we appreciate that and wish you well in making these final modifications. I will just say I think you do have a little bit of time before your public hearings. So if you can pick up some of these, particularly the elevational changes and landscape changes ahead of the public hearings, I think it'll be beneficial, just so folks can see something that resembles what we anticipate the final product being, and in recognition of the fact that trees and landscape has been a high priority topic from our decision makers. So you can work actively with Edgar on those after this meeting.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
no,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Good
With
luck,
that,
guys.
Thank you.
we will be adjourning the November 2 DRC meeting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.